Hello, my friend. You asked me to do a video on a comparison between Stoicism and my existential therapy. And it will have to be a comparison with my take on existential phenomenology, especially as applied to therapy, rather than on existentialism, because there are many existentialisms and I want to focus on my own. But let's start with a little bit of background on Stoicism. So, Stoicism followed in the footsteps of Athenian philosophies that were started with, say, Socrates, and then his pupil Plato developed this search for wisdom, studying life, because reflecting on life is a very important thing to do. Then Plato's pupil Aristotle took this a step further and designed a philosophy which sought to describe all of nature and all of human nature in order to come up with a virtuous way of living. This was then followed up by various other philosophies, particularly by the skeptics, by first the Epicureans, then the skeptics, who all took certain paths. The Epicureans sought to simply treat human suffering by removing any corrupting desires, by eliminating pain and achieving something called ataraxia, which was to be free of pain and difficulties. But what they taught was that you should adjust your values to retain the ones that could give you pleasure and abandon all the other ones. Epicurus lived between 341 BC and 270 BC. The skeptics, especially Pero of Elis, lived 360 to 275, and they take a step beyond Epicureanism, not just to eliminate pleasures that could lead to pain, but to stop any pain or suffering by simply no longer believing in anything, just questioning everything, or no longer desiring anything. So between the Epicureans and the skeptics, you get rid of all your beliefs, your false beliefs at first, but then all of your beliefs. And then we come to the Stoics, who were taking it a step further, trying to work out in what way you could base your life on preparing for the kind of inner strength and control, and especially self-control, so that you could be in complete mastery of your existence. You'd be your own teacher and your own pupil. You would exercise yourself with that every day in the same way as you would physically. And in fact, the Stoics often also did physical exercise as well as mental exercise. The objective was to achieve what they called apatheia, apathy, which means having no pathos, no suffering, having no pain. And you do that, as I said, by controlling your views of the world and by becoming detached from everything, so that you have complete self-control. So, for instance, Epictetus, a Stoic slave who lived between 80 and 135 AD, taught that a man cannot consider himself free unless he possesses self-control and is the master of his own actions. He particularly believed, obviously as a slave, in self-possession and mastery. But probably the most popular Stoic is Marcus Aurelius, who lived from 120 to 180 AD, and who had very strong views about how you should live your life, which he derived from a lifelong self-observation and studying, because he was a Caesar and he had to become, an emperor and be strong, and he had to go to battle, to war. So for him it was all about having a strong mind as well as a strong body, and it was about understanding how you could be in control of your life on a daily basis, no matter what would happen to you. A very strong basis for building a good life, undoubtedly, but also very limited. So while I accept most of the things that Marcus Aurelius had to say in his meditations, and like to read that book regularly or refer to it regularly and have often quoted from it, it is clear to me that A, it is a very masculine view, B, it is a very limited view, it is a very pragmatic view, and it is a very controlling view. It is all about lording it over other people and over yourself rather than understanding. It's not entirely fair to Marcus Aurelius because he did seek understanding, but it was not the kind of understanding that I search for when I work with existential therapy. So the differences then with my existential phenomenological approach is that let's look at the similarities first. That might be more helpful. So we share a lot of views in common. First of all, both Stoicism and existential therapy believe strongly that personal responsibility is paramount, that you cannot live a good life until you reject victim mentality and you hold yourself responsible for the way you respond to life. To not just go through the motions, but to take life seriously and to seek to live authentically is probably something we share in common as well. To accept that death is inevitable and it is important to face that fact is also a very important shared quality. So it is a little bit different because the Stoics insist that you remember memento mori, that you will die. From an existential perspective, it is more of a kind of dance with your finiteness, with your finitude. You don't necessarily have to remind yourself that you might die today, but certainly that everything that you do in the day will confront you with a reminder of your smallness, of your limitations, of the finitude of everything you say and do and experience. And it is important to be aware of that. Both philosophies also seek to live a life of action, of engaged action. So that is what they have in common. But the Stoics believe that everything should be rational and ordered. You know, they live with the logos, the order of the universe and of the world, and it is very defined and quite limited. In this sense, Stoicism is a lot more like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, than existential therapy. The existential view is that life is wide open, and to some people that means it is absurd. I don't believe it is absurd, but it feels absurd very often. And so instead of being indifferent to that, or just controlling that, or instead of living in that chaos, you seek to make that work for you. You start exploring meanings in the world, and you create a framework of meaning, a worldview that will sustain you. And you change this when you find out more facts. So it's like science. It is a scientific approach to life where you learn more about existence on a daily basis. And that rational and ordered way of looking at it is not sufficient. You also have to be open to feel each and every one of your emotions, to be aware of each and every one of your sensations, to be aware of your thoughts, to play with them. So there are no preset meanings. It is all fluid. It's all a dynamic process that is constantly transforming you, and in which you discover new facets to human existence all the time. This is greatly humbling, but it is also very inspiring, because you know that with every day you live to the full and with an open mind and with a desire to understand and create order in the chaos, your life will become more meaningful, and you will feel more vital and more in charge. But you'll never be in control, because nature and society and the cosmos are all much greater than you. They transcend your life. And so you need to be prepared to be humble and observe and learn, rather than seek control. So instead of suppressing your emotions and your difficulties or controlling them, you learn to work with them. You welcome them. You befriend them. You learn to understand what they tell you. They are like clues in the detective story of life. You're on a path towards greater understanding. That's what existential therapy teaches you. And instead of trying to achieve ataraxia, tranquility, or apathy, you seek to achieve authenticity, resonance, being fully alive, and explore whatever there is to explore in life. It is a profoundly adventurous and open approach to living your life, whereas the Stoic approach profoundly seeks to close down options and stick on a very stable path, and to keep yourself very tightly under control, muscular and robust, and therefore a very good practice as part of an existential exploration. I am not against Stoicism in any way. I just think it's one very limited part of all that you need to do in order to explore the many, many layers and dimensions of a human existence. So it's not, either of them, not about just controlling what is in the now either, but allowing learning from the past from an existential perspective. And both are very keen on preparing for a better future. Because, of course, you can always improve on your future. As you learn to create a more promising future for yourself. A future where there is more understanding and more meaning from an existential perspective. Stoicism will give you a floor to stand on. It will give you ground under your feet. But existential therapy will open up your whole environment for exploration, and it will open you up to the sky and the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets and the exploration of the cosmos. These are philosophies that have been originated in different periods of human development. And you will find that Stoicism, very much like some of the world religions, sought to control human beings, to minimize their emotions, to eliminate their emotions if possible. Whereas once we come to an existential view of the world and a phenomenological exploration, we can allow for a blossoming of the human being, not just as a physical person or a social person, but as having an internal world in which you can grow an entire garden, and having a spiritual dimension that doesn't have to be dogmatically controlled by a particular godhead or a particular religion or a particular belief that you will be damned unless you do things a particular way. It allows for a freedom and a free exploration of a human existence in which you can be authentic and you can discover many different aspects of yourself, of other people, and of life. So this is where we start looking at the paradoxical realities. That is not the same in Stoicism. And we start to really stop being afraid of things like guilt or anxiety or sadness. Instead of eliminating them, we welcome them and we use them to understand what our losses are, or what our fears are, or what our aspirations are, and where we can find more energy. So it is a much more sophisticated form of working with your inner world and with your life. But as I said, Stoicism is a very good starting point, and learning to be logical and reasonable is excellent. Learning to exercise self-control, absolutely something you need to learn. But I think we need to apply those things not just to a narrow virtuous life, but to a free, exploratory life where many avenues are opened up and where you, my friend, can become much more than you were yesterday or today, and where there are many more possibilities than would have been imaginable if you were a slave in Roman society. I hope this gives you some introduction to the similarities and differences between Stoicism and existential philosophy as I use it in my work. Take care. my friend, and allow yourself a little bit of experimentation and don't be too harsh on yourself.